Hi. Today we're going to talk about real and personal property. This ends up becoming one of the large kind of arguments between people when you go to close the sale on a house, when personal property that buyers thought was going to stay with the house ends up removed as they walk through and do their pre-inspection. All of a sudden they think something was going to remain and it's gone. And people aren't clear about what they're going to do with personal property when they put it in the contract and how they're going to deal with it. But you need to understand the difference between what's real and personal property and how it should be and could be included with the real estate, especially when you're in the sale transaction. So we're going to talk about, again, the difference between real and personal property. So property. When we talk about property, we want to look at the big picture from the 10,000-foot view looking down. Would be the legal rights that an individual possesses in relation to a thing. It's the rights that are themselves of economic value. So the right to be able to own a piece of real estate, to control that piece of real estate, to say who does and come on the property, how it can be used, those kind of things are part of the rights. So we're going to talk about the importance of rights in property. Property can be tangible or intangible. So when we talk about tangible, it's something we can touch. Intangible, obviously, something we can't touch, but a thought or a design idea would be intangible. And a function of government is the protection of property rights. We absolutely look to the government to create and enforce laws that protect our property rights. A lot of the discussion we're having today right now with the China and U.S. is property rights, how to protect patents. When we look at drug manufacturers and they create drugs, and then all of a sudden those drugs become the corollary drugs or the common prescription, that's after the patent has expired and somebody else can make and create that drug. So all of these things about the protection of rights is important to business. It's also important to the real estate. So real property rights is ownership of proprietary rights in land and anything that's permanently affixed to it. So the real property is land that we think about, the ground, everything connected to it, below it, above it. In personal property, we think about being movable. In other words, it may be attached, but not permanently attached. It can be picked up and moved. Obviously, houses can be picked up and moved, even though they get attached to real estate. It's at that point when a house can become personal property, when it gets picked up and moved. So we want to distinguish between real and personal property in real estate sales, real estate financing, insurance, taxes, and inheritance. Whether you know it or not, your insurance policy absolutely separates the building from land. Your taxes separate the building from land when their valuation. And in real estate inheritance, there is going to be different monetary values associated to the land versus the buildings, the fixtures, things attached to it. In appraising, that's one of the first things you're going to do is say, okay, what's the land worth, and now what's the property, the building attached to that land worth. So we can emphasize what's the property, the land worth, what's the building worth, and what's the total real estate package worth. So we're always distinguishing between the real and personal property. Fixtures. We look at separately identifiable items that were once personal property, but that have become real property, generally through a change of relationship to the land of the buildings. So we're going to look at how is it affixed, attached. So we want to look at that test of the fixture, the annexation. How is it attached? If we have a plumbing faucet, how is it attached? Obviously, a hole might have been cut into the counter or the sink, and then it had to be plumbed in, sealed to make it attached. Is it permanently attached? Well, sure, you would think it is, but can it be easily removed? Sure. But if you remove it, you got to patch it. You got to put something in its place. So we look at the physical attachment. Is it specifically fabricated for that building? Again, a piece of art that was designed, or a welded material, or a bench, or something like that was designed specifically for a piece of real estate. We think about it becoming permanently attached or part of the real estate. But then we think, can it be taken away from the real estate? How does it diminish the value of the item and the real estate if it gets taken away or taken off? This is when I talk about when we have contract in the house and what we're dealing with and we're selling things, it's better to go ahead and make sure you list absolutely everything in the contract that's going to stay with the house. But the best thing to do is, if you don't want a piece of personal property to stay in a house when you're going to sell it, take it away before you start listing it, before you put it for sale on the market, so people don't see it in the house as a relationship to the house. And then finally, the intention. What was the expression of the annexer, of the person that put the piece of property, of personal property to the real estate? What was their thought when they did it? Again, did they specifically have it designed to meet and meet the needs of affixing it to the real estate? So we're going to look at all those things when we test a fixture. Trade fixtures. In commercial real estate specifically, we have trade fixtures, and these are items that are annexed to land or buildings by a tenant, and they're used in the tenant's trade or business. Think about a storefront. The shelving, the display cases, things like that that they use when they sell, very often get attached to the real estate. They're attached to the real estate so that they can become stable, so they're not a safety issue. So again, the items that are attached to the real estate are considered trade fixtures, and the trade fixtures are actually owned by the tenant. And most of our leases say that when the tenants leave the building, they're going to take those trade fixtures with them. We expect as a landlord that our space is going to be returned to its condition when the tenant leased it. So again, the trade fixtures, what was its use, its purpose, and what's it intended to be done? When tenants leave their trade fixtures, very often what we do as a landlord, we can charge a fee to take it out, but usually we'll let it stay, and we'll hope that the next tenant might be able to use it. And after a certain period of time, if we let it stay too long, we go to remove it, it becomes a landlord's property. It's our cost to remove it. So at the time the tenant lease is done, if we decide it should be removed, the time to do it would be right away and have the tenant pay and take it out. Growing crops. Fructus industrialis. When an annual crop that was product of human effort today, any crop that owes its value to human care and labor would be considered fructus industrialis. So think about that farmer that leases your land. They plant seeds. Typically, most of the seeds they plant, the corn, tobacco, things like that, don't come back year after year. They have to replant. And so that replanting, an ongoing effort to make the crop come up, would be part of the fructus industrialis. Under a lease with a farmer, tenant farmer, the tenant farmer very often owns the crop that comes off the land. The lease will specify the terms of how often, how long. Is it a 1-year lease? Is it a 2-year lease? A 10-year lease? How long does it last that the farmer gets to take the crop from his industrialis, from his efforts to make it grow? Fructus naturalis is crops that were produced on perennial roots, trees, apples, orchards, things like that. The crops that are grown and they reproduce year after year, blueberries, things like that, that would be fructus naturalis. Obviously, if we have a farm and we have tenant farmers, they may have some ownership interest in the plants, the trees, the things that are put on the property, but once they become attached to the property, that tree grows on that property, it then becomes part of the real estate. The UCC defines growing crops as goods. So when we do farm leases, we're very specific about what is owned by the farmer, what's owned by the landowner, and who gets to benefit, and how are they benefiting. Secured transactions. It's a transaction in which the parties agree that personal property or fixtures will secure a loan or the purchase of an item on credit. I have a situation right now where I've got a liquor barn store that's a tenant of mine in Louisville, and they're asking the landlord to sign a transaction agreement that allows them to secure their loan to buy the business based on some of the things that are attached to fixtures of the store. Again, they're tenant fixtures, but they want to state up front that there's a loan that's securing them, and if something happens to the loan, the lender can come back to us as the landlord and remove that property and sell that property. So they're very specific about this in the loan document. So it is a secured transaction when they're looking at doing this. The attachment, again, they look at the process by which the secured party acquires the security, interest, and collateral. Or not only do they sign an agreement, they may have to file legal paperwork to prove that they have that secured interest. Then the perfection would be the process by which the secured party establishes the priority and the collateral over the claims of the third party. So they're perfecting the claim. They're getting involved in the thing where they can actually sell the fixtures from the storefront, from the building. Now, Had this also happen in another location where we had a little yogurt shop, and the tenants had all of their fixtures, the iced yogurt makers, the sinks, the equipment that was produced and used to produce and display and dispense the yogurt was all part of a loan that they had. And when they went belly up, the landlord got the building back, but the loan company that lent on the equipment decided to perfect the claim, and they came back in and they had an auction where they could sell all the equipment. And then I had to help the buyers get the equipment out, to give them access to get the equipment out of the building, and make sure that when they removed the equipment, and when they removed sinks and things like that, that they capped off the plumbing, that we didn't have a bad problem there. But that company had to go through that process of perfecting the security interest that they had on the fixtures. A fixture filing is a section of the UCC that allows the security interest to persist in fixtures or goods, personal property, that later become the fixtures. Again, so they're filing paperwork to establish that they might have a claim. Whether they go through and exercise that claim is another matter, but they're doing these filings of paperwork to show that they have an interest. And that is really all we're going to talk about with our whole thing about fixtures, personal property.